Hello there, welcome to Boomstick Gaming, this is Alex, and I'm going to be showcasing some of the best modern hidden gem games from the last 3 years that are definitely deserving of more widespread acclaim, in my opinion. It's summertime and the big AAA releases are few and far between, so this is the perfect opportunity to try something a little different, while also shining some light on the more talented dev teams out there at the same time. I can almost entirely guarantee none of you have played all 8 of the titles I have in store. If you have already, you're either myself or you have glorious taste, but for everyone else, if you have the time and funds available, consider giving at least a few of these worthy games a respectful try. First off, in no particular order, Ashen, the action RPG from late 2018, which was one of my favorites of that year. Ashen did what most Souls-like games don't, and instead of purely just trying to nail the punishing combat aspect, it also gives the world design the proper love it needed, which is just as important, if not more so, when trying to replicate the success of Soulsborne. Each region is diverse and multi-layered, offering tons of secrets to find, with combat sprinkled out at just the right pace, not artificially compounding the difficulty by going too overboard with that enemy plopper tool. The dungeons in Ashen are easily the standout, and possibly some of the most memorable and dungeon-y feeling dungeons of any action RPG. They are deep, dark, atmospheric, and challenging, and while you're trapped in these enthrallingly brooding areas, the tension builds and builds the deeper you delve, until you want nothing more than to be able to see that glorious sunlight again. Definitely some of my absolute favorite memories of exploring caves and dungeons outside of the Zelda series are right here in Ashen. If you're trying to sift through the gargantuan pile of Souls-likes from the last decade or so, I encourage you to check out an example of when it's done exactly right. Before moving on, I did happen to get a sponsor for today's video willing to help out the channel, so let's take a quick look at the new features in the sci-fi fantasy action MMO Skyforge, which is available free to play on PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. No PlayStation Plus required on PS4. The combat system in Skyforge is quite quick and flashy, with a large focus on gaining access to and properly utilizing the 18 total character classes. If this looks like your kind of thing and want to give it a go, you can find links to download Skyforge right at the top of the video description. There are brand new seasonal challenges to take on, and the Gorgonite Invasion season to be working towards, where you can earn 20 levels of exclusive unlocks the more you play, like the Shadow Divine form and the Flying Blade's wings. For PlayStation Plus members, there is even a Divine Defender pack you can snag right now for free as well, granting you a unique armor and helmet along with a 3-day premium account level. An extra special thanks to Skyforge for sponsoring this section of the video. Next up, Valfaris, the heavy metal action platformer, and to rip off and quote myself, it's one of the best side-scrolling shooters in over 3 decades. That is quite the claim, but the carnage zen you enter as the heavy music blasts in your ears makes for an unforgettable 2D Doom-esque ride that actually gets you pumped to be a gamer. The arsenal of unique weapons you have at your disposal are directly woven into the core difficulty curve, where you often need to choose between powering checkpoints or powering your gibbing devices. For those who rely on the frequent safety of checkpoints, you won't be able to max out everything you have, but you gain the advantage of more frequent trial and error, where risky players who skip these will have earlier, more devastating weapons to somewhat help them not die epically. The creative level design and sheer amount and variety of boss fights is just as breakneck as the pace of the tunes, which makes Valfaris feel a cut above the rest in the retro-inspired side-scroller genre. If you have even 0.01% of an affinity for 2D platform shooters and don't hate metal music, you have to go play Valfaris right now. Well, actually wait till the video's done because you know the whole YouTube job thing. Thanks. Now let's slow things down a bit and talk about the tactics RPG Felseal Arbiter's Mark. The Final Fantasy Tactics attempts are just as in abundance as the Souls-likes we talked about earlier, but just like those, there is so much more to getting the feel of these right than just wearing a skin that looks like them. What makes Felseal feel like a true spiritual successor to the Tactics series is how it balances the tough but fair strategy combat, the diverse classes, and worthwhile upgrades, without going too far overboard and getting lost in over-design. I enjoy the Disgaea games from time to time, but sometimes you gotta just rein in those ideas a little bit. I covered Fell Seal very briefly in one of my Games Under the Radar episodes I was doing when it first came out, since I got to play it a little early, and since then, it has gained a nice little cult following. I also just recently picked up the new expansion that released not too long ago called Missions and Monsters, which adds in some pretty cool stuff like town management, creature units, and more scenarios. If you are a fan of the long-dormant Final Fantasy Tactics series, or you just like RPGs with that addicting gearing out an awesome team element, I highly recommend going for Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark over the majority of the competition. Next, Elderborn, a melee combat-focused first-person action game. While some first-person melee games focus on trying to feel slow, weighty, and realistic, Elderborn goes for the opposite and is hyper-quick and twitch-based, making it feel like the Doom equivalent of melee action. Yes, that makes 2 Doom references in just one video, which should be the quota. Combat has that flow and response to it where you enter into that zone where you feel like you can start seeing incoming attacks before they're even there as you become a blur of slashes and decapitations. The parry system is a personal favorite of mine and probably easily the best one from any first-person melee game I've played. There's nothing deep about it, you just hit the parry button, but the input window is really tightly balanced, and when performed correctly, you get an incredibly satisfying brief moment of slow-mo to pile on some damage. The campaign is not terribly long, but it sure is a blast while it lasts, and out of any game on this list, I wish the most that Elderborn gets the opportunity for a full-on sequel with at least quadruple the budget, because the team was really onto something with the combat mechanics they crafted here. Guacamelee 2, a game or a series I'm sure you've heard of before, but I feel like the sequel didn't quite get the buzz it deserved. I found it to be superior to the first game in literally every way, making it somewhere in the top echelon of Metroidvanias in my opinion. The brawler-style combat is as fun as ever, the upgrades are great, but most importantly, the level design was on a whole nother level. This has some of the most creative and surprising platforming setups I've seen from any 2D game, and it constantly keeps you on your toes by requiring more and more out of your skills. It's almost impossible to not be having a great time in Guacamelee 2, and it's definitely deserving of more than a, yeah, I've heard of that, but I didn't get around to playing that one. Seriously, try to play it. Rime is a beautiful action-adventure, downplay the action part since there's no traditional attacking, but even with its more passive nature, there are tons of tense and exciting moments all throughout. The journey has you traveling to vastly different style locales, solving some little puzzles that never really got to that point of frustration, yet were still enjoyable to solve. I don't want to spoil it here, but the story the game tells is one that will stick with you and make you reflect back on everything you just played through. The world design and overall aesthetic is a remarkable achievement all to itself, and I would most definitely like to see this art style continued with a future project. Rime is a somewhat short but very memorable adventure, and I want to see more of what the studio can do, so find a way to pick this up and give it a fair chance. Next, Monolith, a bullet hell action roguelite from 2017 that has been supported with a few big expansions, one of which just came out at the very end of 2019. Even to this day when I boot this up, I still get room layouts I have never seen before, and there has to be at least hundreds, if not 1,000, carefully crafted little action rooms. This is a very important element in roguelites, where the last thing you want is to start seeing repeat room layouts in just a few hours, to where you start getting that feeling of deja vu. Monolith's combat is razor precise, and your lacking skill is the only reason you ever take on damage, making for possibly the most raw, skill-based game on this list. Monolith might look simple, but it has tons of depth to it that might actually surprise you if you give it a try. This is one of the few games that always remains installed on my machine because it's fun to just pop into Monolith from time to time. The very last entry on this list, from part of the creators behind Super Meat Boy and The Binding of Isaac, the gauntlet platformer The End Is Nigh. The End Is Nigh feels like a true spiritual successor to Meat Boy, but is a little more exploration focused, still requiring almost the same level of precise platforming. My favorite element of this is the fact that it plays out almost like an open world platformer in some ways, where on the screen edges you can often go right, left, up, or down. What's ingenious about this is how you can double back on rooms from different angles to find entirely other secret areas and collectibles, which are tumors in this because of course they are. The game really progresses well and expands on that concept up until the soul-crushingly difficult conclusion. Overall, The End Is Nigh is a really great platformer that should be remembered just as strongly as Super Meat Boy before it. That wraps up all 8 of the main games I wanted to highlight from the last few years, and this video idea has been rolling around in my head for months now, so it was pretty fun to finally get around to making it. Let me know which of these you've already played, and also which ones you might now go give a try, because I'm curious to see which ones stood out the most overall. As always, this has been Alex, my brand new unpaid editor Majora, and if this had any poor writing in it, feel free to place all your blame right onto him. I'll see you next time.